Stan, you can't leave. I'm not the one who's leaving. He is.
Over the years, South Park has grown from making Kenny meet his demise every single episode to keeping him alive in mostly every episode. But beneath the crude humor and chaotic antics involved with his death, the show has occasionally delved into deeper themes, and one of the most poignant is grief. Grief is a powerful and often misunderstood emotion. It manifests differently for everyone. Some people shut down, others lash out, and some try to distract themselves from the pain. South Park masterfully showcases all these different ways that people cope with loss. As Kenny's health deteriorates, the boys are forced to confront the inevitable truth of losing their friend. Each of them handles it their own way. Eric with his selfish scheming, Stan's avoidance of the matter, and Kyle's quiet concern. All of these mirror the complex and often confusing emotions that come with grief. It's an episode that isn't just about Kenny's death. It's about how we process the unthinkable and find our own ways to move forward, even when it feels impossible to do at the moment. Because if there's one thing South Park does well, it's mixing poop jokes with surprisingly deep life lessons. In episode 13 from season 5, named Kenny Dies, we see that the episode starts with a woman having an abortion. Now, trust me, this is going to be very relevant later on, but just keep that in the back of your mind. The doctors ask the woman if she'd like to donate her unwanted child to stem cell research, to which she agrees. Luckily, her charitable donation ends up going to the best cause there is, saving Kenny. Whoops. No, wait, hold on, no, not that. I meant Cartman's own shakies. So how did these stem cells get there? Well, obviously the driver took lessons, probably from an Asian driver.
I turn now. Good luck, everybody else!
He ends up driving off of a cliff and crashing into a ravine. And who finds these cells? Yep, just as you guessed, Eric. But what are Kenny, Kyle, and Stan doing while this is all going on? Well, they're burning cow shit, just like any other elementary school kid would be doing. It's at this point that we see Kenny coughing seamlessly innocently for the first time. It kind of reminds me of all the stupid things I've done as a child. I mean, I'm sure you've also, done a bunch of stuff without realizing what kind of risk it poses to your own health. You see, burning cow dung releases dioxins and chlorophenols, which are chemicals that sound like they belong in one of Mr. Garrison's questionable science lessons.
Mr. Garrison, stop!
According to doctors, both of these are very, very bad for our health. And I'm not one to digress because they probably know a lot better than I do. Though if you ask Cartman on the other hand, he'd probably blame it on some wild conspiracy involving hippies.
You hippie!
Anyways, exposure to the elements could result in muscular twitching, spasms, tremors, weakness, attacks, convulsions, just like in Kenny's case, a muscular disease. But more on Kenny's sickness later. Let's talk a little bit more about grief. Now, why do we grieve? Well, we grieve because we care deeply. Grief is a natural response to losing someone or something we formed some sort of attachment to, whether that's a person, a pet, a job, or even a way of life. It's a reflection of the bonds we form and the love we feel, making it an unavoidable part of life. While grief is painful, understandably, it also serves as a reminder of how much we care. It highlights the beauty in our connections. After all, we only grieve because we've loved. And that's what makes grief, in its own way, a profound and meaningful experience, in my opinion. There's also no real right way to grieve. And everyone grieves differently, especially navigating the pain of losing someone close to you. Some people find comfort in expressing their emotions openly, while others might bottle it up, needing time and the space to process how they're feeling privately. Some might throw themselves into work or other distractions to avoid the weight of sorrow weighing down on them, while others seek solace in rituals, memories, or in the support of their loved ones. The most important to remember is that grief is a very deep personal journey. There is no single path to healing. Each person's way of coping is absolutely valid provided it's healthy, shaped by their own unique experiences and the nature of the bonds they've lost. In this journey of grieving, we can actually learn a lot from South Park, especially with Eric, who's busy doing the most important thing anyone could do in such situation. Because, you see, while Stan, Kyle, and Kenny are busy burning cow dung like it's some kind of avant-garde elementary school science experiment, Eric is channeling his inner big pharma as he stumbles upon a crash truck full of unborn fetuses meant for stem cell research and does what any self-respecting capitalist would try to do. He sells them to make a huge profit. I mean, at least he's gonna try. They're not just regular fetuses. I mean, they are.
Mint condition, tax-free.
Now, the others don't seem to agree on Eric's possession of the aborted treasure chest and leave quickly after. It's here where we see Kenny's cough getting worse for the final time. Just like a lot of us, Kenny's cough getting worse doesn't really seem that big of a deal. I mean, hell, just go to get some Campbell's chicken noodle soup, some Dayquil, and a Sprite, and you'll be good to go. Even with all of that, I mean, how many times do you end up just getting better without any problems? Probably many times. There's probably barely any times you've really needed serious medical help over a small cough. It's always that one time that you don't get better, and you'll probably regret not consulting a doctor sooner. You'd be surprised to learn how many times serious sickness is diagnosed too late. According to a 2014 article of The Guardian that features cancer studies, almost half of the diagnosed patients are diagnosed too late. But for Kenny, there is still hope, as his friend is in the possession of the antidote. Luckily, he isn't currently able to sell them, as all interested buyers are...
Yep, that's me.
breaking his balls. Cut to the next scene of the episode, and this is where everything starts going from bad to worse. Kyle and Stan are sitting in class before they're called into the principal's office.
The principal? Oh, come on! We don't know where Cartman is, Miss Chokes on Dick.
Now, the boys walk to the office, and they're greeted not only by their principal, Mr. Mackey and Chef, but also their parents. And it doesn't take a PhD to know that when your parents are at school for you, it's probably bad. But the boys didn't do anything wrong, though, and neither did Cartman, unexpectedly. It's about Kenny. As Mr. Mackey explains, Kenny went to the hospital last night, and he's still pretty sick. Well, how sick?
Children, Kenny has been diagnosed with a terminal disease.
Those words hit the boys like a train. And from here on out, everything is downhill. And it goes downhill fast. No breaks. Stan and Kyle are struck by shock as we see Stan express himself.
But the doctors are gonna make him better, right?
Keep in mind, in the world of South Park, these boys are only 10 years old. The responses we see Stan having to his friend being terminally sick is a reaction that a normal child would probably have at his age. By the primary school years, children may understand death, but often don't have the emotional maturity to deal with it. Younger children may think death is reversible and that they are responsible. Like mentioned here, Stan understands that his friend is sick and could eventually die, but he doesn't have the emotional intelligence yet to properly deal with it. He's stuck in denial.
Mom, that's what hospitals are for. They can make him better.
We even see Randy give a textbook example of how to approach Stan by being sensitive but straightforward about the situation.
They don't think so, Stanley. Your friend is terminally ill, and that means it's going to be going to heaven soon.
We also see Kyle react in the same way.
Wait, Kenny's going to die?
It kind of reminds me of my own first experience with death. You know, I was around the age of 7 when my grandpa was getting ill. I just didn't understand anything about it. It started with going to the hospital with my family and being told that grandpa was just, a little too sick. And that's why he was having trouble remembering anything. They told me the best doctors in the country were working on making him feel better. And, we held on to the hope that he'll be back to his good old self again. But it wasn't long after that we got the news that he'd passed. Everything moved quickly from that point. From suddenly seeing my grandpa in an open casket so everyone could say goodbye, to my father giving the speech at his funeral. It was all very weird to me, I'd say. Everyone was crying and sad, and I don't mean to laugh, but I remember I was just sad about my mom not letting me wear my favorite shirt. It was black and they had a giant skull on it. In hindsight, I probably wasn't the brightest kid. But it wasn't until my dad started crying, which I've never seen up until that point, that I realized that something just wasn't right, and it wasn't just about my shirt. Anyways, back to South Park. The realization is becoming more and more apparent that Kenny might be going to die, except for Stan, who still remains in denial.
Kenny can't die! Kenny can't die!
Even though this is just a TV show, it still raises the question, how do we deal with the concept of death at such a young age? Well, a study from the Child Mind Institute explains that you can't protect your kids from the pain of loss, but you can help them build healthy coping skills. Most children know something about death. They've seen it on TV, but it's very different when it happens to someone close to them. Parents can't take their kids' pain away, but they can help them cope in healthy ways. Much like everybody else, every child will deal with grief differently. Mine at the time was to wear my favorite shirt. I just wish my grandpa would have told me that he just didn't like my favorite shirt, instead of dying and forcing me to wear a different one to prove a point. Anyway, the consensus of professionals seems to be a very situation dependent. They do agree to always be direct, so there should be no baby talk saying that people just went to sleep. Besides that, encouraging your child to talk about their feelings and discussing the afterlife with them, and also reassuring them that they'll still be here for a long, long time, seems to be something that almost all professionals can agree on and say that it's the right course of action to take. And in terms of closure, it's more of a personal decision between you and your child whether to attend the funeral together. You know, there are times where some children just simply aren't ready for it. You know, it is an intense experience for people. But if you decide that the funeral is not the best way, there are other ways to give your child the opportunity to say goodbye. There's planting a tree in memory of them, sharing stories, or releasing balloons. You know, these can all be good alternatives for helping bring closure to a child. Now, let's get back to South Park. Luckily, Kenny hasn't died yet, and there's no need for a funeral. But now the news has been brought up to Cartman, who, as we all know, is way too busy getting his balls broken trying to liquidate his newfound wealth. Now, the boys show up to Cartman's door to break the news, and Cartman is way too busy. However, he does make some time for them by putting his assistant on the phone.
How much do you pay for that? You're breaking my balls.
Kyle breaks the news to Eric that Kenny is in the hospital and that he might die. Just like Stan and Kyle, Eric is also shocked by the news.
Die? Kenny?
Cartman hasn't had a moment to process it yet, but Stan is already speaking up.
Don't you say that! Kenny's not gonna die!
We still see Stan being stuck in the first two phases of grief, which the stages of grief are defined by a Harvard study. It should be noted that not everyone experiences these stages in the same way, or in the same order, or even at all. What I see happening to Stan is that he is simultaneously in denial as well as being stuck in the phase of anger. He is really refusing to accept or even really acknowledge the possibility of death right in front of him. He's also blaming his friends for lack of care or support towards Kenny, with trying to get him healthy again. But again, I'm no therapist, so I could be massively wrong about this. The trio then man up and get to the hospital to see their friend Kenny. We see Eric holding a present and actually seemingly care for his friend, in contrast to his normal psychopathic self.
We brought you a present. It's a gobo fighter.
But it's the same concept of just getting a dog with your partner, and it's not going to fix the relationship. Giving a terminally ill patient a present is not going to fix his illness, and it won't make him feel any better. Everybody knows that both can only be resolved by a fetus. During the visit, Kyle remains the positive one.
Hey, we were all just talking about how when you get better, we're all gonna go down to Stark's Pond again and go camping. Huh, Stan?
This, however, could also be seen as a form of denial by not coming to terms with Kenny's apparent death. His overly positive approach also may not always have a positive impact. According to Mallory Lee, a social work counselor, approaching a loved one's terminal diagnosis with too much optimism and positivity can have the opposite effect. It may discount a real emotion that someone is feeling and might make them feel like they can't share what they're actually going through. Now, we know Kenny is not a talker, and Kyle is just doing what he's been told to by Mr. Mackey. But what we can learn from South Park is that it is very important to communicate with the people around you. Chances are you're not alone in what you're feeling. And just like that, Stan is not alone. We see him run out of the hospital as soon as Kyle finishes his sentence. Stan is still unable to come to terms with seeing Kenny just like that in that state. But Stan is angry. Angry at the world, even angry at Kyle. He doesn't want to be pretending. His friend is dying, and he is struggling internally to make Kenny believe he will get better at some point. It's really this internal conflict that really struck a chord with me. You know, for me personally, when a loved one has fallen ill, it's a continuous battle, at least in my experience. I found myself sort of oscillating between hope and hopelessness. One minute, I'd be trying to lift them up, pretending nothing was wrong, maybe even cracking a joke or two to lighten the mood. I'd ask them, how you feeling today, with a smile, just desperately hoping for some good news, even if I knew it wasn't likely to happen. But then there were the quiet moments, alone with my thoughts, where the weight of the situation would hit me. I'd think about the afterlife, wondering if it's just a comforting story we tell ourselves. Catching myself daydreaming about them in some peaceful place, smiling and at peace. But then the reality would drag me back down, and I'd feel more overwhelmed by the uncertainty of the future. I would have loved to ask my loved ones how they felt about it. I dread the thought of making them think that they could be leaving this temporary life we live on Earth for the eternal forever. I personally resonate a lot with the idea of Stan portraying the hopelessness in this episode, where Kyle is portraying the hope of some way, and Eric, well, I mean, he's more of a mix between a miracle that's forming and, that distant uncle quietly celebrating his upcoming inheritance. After Kyle's touching pep talk, we see Stan walking away. He remains unable to come to terms with Kenny's likely departure of his earthly bonds. We then cut to Cartman, and he's, talking to Kenny. I kind of expected him to try to get more unborn fetuses out of the hospital already, but it seems grief might have struck a chord with him as well. We see him sharing a heartwarming moment with Kenny.
I kind of always thought you were my best friend. I don't know.
Kenny acknowledges Eric's heartfelt words and gives him a pat on the back. Without going too much off topic this time, we see Eric portray acceptance a lot more. He's still very positive when in Kenny's presence, but as soon as the door closes, he also loses it. We see Cartman crying for one of the first few genuine times in South Park. This time, not because he wants an iPad. We even see Kyle confronting Cartman. Who would have ever thought that? It's a beautiful portrayal of how grief can unite two seemingly opposite individuals. Cartman is reassuring Kyle that he'll find a cure.
I'm gonna find a cure, Kyle. I swear to God, I'm gonna find a cure.
But a cure for what, exactly? Well, you wouldn't be surprised. I mean, it's not for Kenny. As the episode continues, we see Eric get to a stem cell research center, which has been canceled by the government. It's here that Eric learns exactly how stem cells work.
In other words, if a little boy was dying from a muscular disease, the stem cells could become new muscle tissue.
It's very heartwarming, isn't it? Eric is gonna go save Kenny, right? Well, not really. There's not even a stage of grief involved here anymore.
If the stem cells were placed next to a Shakey's pizza, they would become another Shakey's pizza.
But we shouldn't be surprised. And with that, Cartman's new mission is born. All he needs to do is change the government's mind to continue stem cell research. In some way, this is a reference to experimental treatments and their roles for those in need. People experiencing serious health issues can go through all sorts of regular treatment, and if none work, they may be desperate to get any help they can. I've been lucky enough not to have experienced such experiments, but I can't speak for everybody. South Park did shine a light on stem cell research, and its importance for society, though. Funnily enough, without them, I probably wouldn't have even known what stem cells were capable of. Now that Eric is on his mission to save stem cell research, we see Kenny deteriorating further. Kyle is visiting him in the hospital, and he's brought a drawing Butters has made for Kenny along with him. Kenny's parents, as well as Chef, are present in the room alongside him. We see Kenny ask where Stan is. And as we all know, Stan has not been able to come to terms with his friend dying yet. His grief manifests as avoidance. He can't bear to visit Kenny in the hospital or even talk about what's happening with anybody. Stan's inability to face his friend's suffering highlights the deep emotional turmoil that grief can cause. It just goes to show that it can be overwhelming and absolutely paralyzing if you're forced to confront the morality of someone you care so deeply about. And then there's somebody at the door for Kenny.
Hey, look who's here.
Could it be Stan? Nope. It's Make-A-Wish. And when you're in the hospital and Make-A-Wish shows up, you know it's bad.
So, Kenny, if you could have one wish, what would it be?
Luckily, Kenny has the perfect solution. He simply wishes not to die.
He said his wish is not to die.
Checkmate, Make-A-Wish. Now you have to make Kenny better. I never really understood why anyone asks Make-A-Wish for those silly little requests, like meeting Donald Duck. Just wish to be better and go visit him at Disneyland. It's not that hard, is it? Like a lot of thoughtful wishes, the Foundation does not honor it. So they arrange what any sane kid would wish for, a meet and greet with Madonna. To which Kenny says, "Couldn't agree more, Kenny." And for those of you who didn't understand what Kenny said, he said the following: Madonna is an old anorexic woman who wore out her welcome years ago, and that she suddenly speaks with a British accent and she thinks she can still play the guitar. She should go herself. You could say a lot about Kenny, but you can't say he's lost his taste in music. As the episode continues, we see what Stan is up to. In some way, I feel like he's trying to relive the last moments of fun he had together with Kenny. As we see them earlier in the episode burning cow dung, well, there's Stan doing it again. But this time, he's all by himself. It reminds him of a time when life was still good. And then Chef shows up to talk to Stan. We see Stan is a little less in denial. Right now, he's still very angry, questioning why God has to take Kenny away from him.
Why? Kenny's my friend. Why can't God take someone else's friend?
If we refer back to the stages of grief, we can see now he's entered another phase, the one of bargaining. Why can't he just trade with God, give him another person, and make someone else lose his friend? Not Stan. Though the next phase of depression and sadness is also shown lightly through Stan's emotions, he's also showing signs of acceptance, in my opinion. It's here that Chef drops a beautiful explanation.
Stan, sometimes God takes those closest to us because it makes him feel better about himself.
Now, not everyone here may be religious, so you might not resonate really well with Chef's words, but if we reference that to life outside of South Park, it makes sense for them to cover religion as well as the surrounding topic of death. On their deathbed, people tend to turn to God as well, even when they weren't that religious throughout their lives, because it means life after death. It's something known as a deathbed conversation. Guess they were pretty creative naming that, huh? People fear the inevitable, and fear is a true motivator. The thought of being truly gone should never be belittled. Hope is absolutely a coping mechanism to keep you sane. It's all a part of the grieving process, resulting in conversations like this. What surprised me about this is that South Park didn't make fun of religion in this case, but oh well, they've done plenty of that in the past. Alright, let's get back to the serious part. Chef steps up his motivational word game and says this:
If you want to make a baby cry, first you give it a lollipop, then you take it away.
The way I view it, in some way, grieving is a beautiful thing. The only way you can truly grieve is after loving somebody or something so much that you're absolutely devastated that it's gone. That's where the beauty of it all lies. After all, if there wasn't any love or any sense of attachment to that person or object, there would be no grieving. Even when grieving sucks in that moment, and however you want to process it, it still allows you to celebrate and be grateful for the moments that you've shared with that person. Now, I'll leave you with an interesting thought for this. Would you rather be the first one to die in your friend group or relationship, or the last one? Personally, I'd rather be the first, but only after GTA 6 comes out. I'm hoping to see that day. Because if it's anything like Half-Life 3, I might be waiting as long as Kenny's been avoiding a permanent death. Seriousness aside, let's continue on with the episode. Chef's words seem to have inspired Stan. He tells him that he thinks he's starting to get it now.
I think I understand.
Now, let's check up on Cartman.
My name is Eric Cartman and I live in Colorado.
Well, Cartman is speaking in Congress? I don't know. He still needs to get Congress to approve continuation of stem cell research so that it can help Kenny, right? I'm a bit surprised that they also let a 10-year-old come in and just talk to Congress. Anyone else think that weird? No? Just me? Okay. After a tear-jerking speech and singing The Heat of the Moment.
It was the heat of the moment, telling me what your heart meant.
The audience joins in and starts singing along.
Heat of the moment, telling me what your heart meant.
He gets the approval from Congress, and it's back to where the episode started. Unplanned parenthood. Just like any 10-year-old would, we see Cartman now trying to convince women to get abortions so he can save his friend Kenny. I mean, men and women can always just get pregnant again, right? You can't save Kenny twice. Checking in on the others, Stan has finally reached the next part of his grieving process. He's going to be there for his friend in his last moments Kenny has on Earth.
I'm gonna see my friend because he needs me right now.
Only to find out he's too late.
He just stopped breathing.
Just like that, Stan realizes that we humans never get enough time on this earth. Everyone is always thinking that they have more time with each other. How many times have you heard people say that they've spent exactly right amount of time or even too much time with the deceased person in their life? You probably have to be a psychopath or have something wrong with you to tell that to everyone in your speech. Take this moment to think about your loved ones, your grandparents, or your parents. They aren't the same youthful people they used to be, even though they're probably on your mind. We grow up with them being the capable ones, whereas one point they're becoming less and less capable of certain things. A little gray here or there, some wrinkles here on the side of their eyes, maybe the old skin ligament showing on both sides of their chin. We're usually just too busy with growing up ourselves to notice these small details. And this brings me back to Stan. He didn't get the chance to say goodbye to his dear old friend. Kenny was pulled away abruptly.
I let Kenny down. I'm his worst friend.
We see Stan portraying guilt for not being there for Kenny's last moments. It's usual for people to feel somewhat guilty after someone dies. Now, I've never had the biggest feeling of guilt over losing someone, but for those of you that do, I've found this article that I thought might be able to help you with dealing with it. If you ever find yourself feeling guilty about a past action or inaction, set aside time to think about your feelings and work through the following exercise. Write a list of things you regret. Identify any regrets that you can act upon. These could be things like thanking a friend who you have never properly thanked, or an act of kindness. Forgive yourself for those regrets that you cannot correct. Recognize what you have done well and congratulate yourself for it. This may help you put things into a better perspective. But fear not. For Stan, this moment of regret was only temporary. It was time for a miracle.
You guys, come quick! What, Cartman? Why it's a miracle, you guys!
The stem cells are working, and Cartman was finally able to build another Shakey's pizza place. It was at this moment that Stan realizes he wasn't Kenny's worst friend, Cartman was. In the end, what can we learn from South Park in the way grief is portrayed? First off, I realize that grief is like a bad fart. Everyone experiences it differently, and no one wants to admit how bad it really stinks. Stan avoiding Kenny because he couldn't handle the pain reminded me of myself a lot of times where I dodged my own emotions like a dodgeball aimed at my face. And then there's Cartman, whose grief initially comes out as pure, unfiltered greed. But hey, who knew that under all that selfishness, he might have just been a scared little turd who didn't want to lose his friend. It made me think that maybe, just maybe, we're all a bit of Cartman when it comes to dealing with grief. Furthermore, Kenny dies, slaps us in the face with the cold, hard truth that there is no escaping from death, and everyone has to deal with it sooner or later. Unlike the usual South Park shtick, where Kenny dies and then magically pops back in like a bad sequel,
Hey guys, what's going on? Oh, hey, Kenny.
this time his death was, well, actually kinda serious. It made me realize that life's fragile, kinda like Cartman's ego. And if we're not careful, we might miss out on what really matters, spending time with the people we love, or eating all the cheesy poofs before they're gone. Then Stan's struggles to visit Kenny in the hospital was like watching a dog trying to avoid a bath. Painful, but relatable. I mean, who wants to face that kind of hurt? Not me, absolutely. It's hard balancing between remembering your loved ones as they were when they were healthy, or on their deathbed. The episode also made me think about how important it is to have your crew around when you're going through tough times. Even though Stan, Cartman, and all the others were handling Kenny's situation like a bunch of clueless kids. Oh, well, I mean, they are a bunch of clueless kids. They were still in it together. Grief is like trying to lift something heavy. It's easier if you got a few friends helping you out. Unless that friend is Cartman, in which case, good luck. And finally, Kenny dies gave me a good dose of life's absurdity. I mean, Cartman's stem cell scheme? Absolute classic. It's like he took a serious issue and said, yeah, let's make that as ridiculous as possible. But in true South Park fashion, it reminded me that sometimes when life gets too heavy, the best thing you can do is find something to laugh about. Because if you don't, you'll just end up like Mr. Mackey, saying, okay, to everything and feeling totally numb, okay? So there it is. South Park's take on death and grieving. There's more to unfold though, as in other episodes there have been others who, didn't take losing a loved one that well. Let me know if you'd like an episode on that. See you guys next time.